It was 2:57 a.m. on a cold Thursday night, deep in the dead of winter, when I first heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate strikes, each one echoing through the silence of my house like a hammer against bone. I froze. I knew I was the only one awake. My parents were out of town, and my younger brother had been fast asleep for hours. No one should have been in the basement. No one. At first, I thought it was just the pipes groaning or maybe the wood settling from cold. But the knocks came again, steady, measured, almost patient. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I could feel the vibrations faintly through the floorboards beneath my feet. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't the wind. It was something or someone down there in the basement, trying to get my attention. You ever have that moment where your brain screams at you to ignore something, but your curiosity pulls harder? That's what I felt, staring at the basement door across the hall. Its frame was warped with age, paint chipping along the edges, and that small strip of darkness beneath it looked impossibly black. I wanted to look away. I wanted to go back to bed and pretend I never heard a thing. But I couldn't. I kept staring at that door, waiting, half hoping the knocks were just in my head. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the living room clock. Every sound seemed magnified, every creak of the wood, every breath I took. And then, just when I thought it had stopped, it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Only this time, it was louder and closer. I should probably explain a little about myself and about that house before you think I'm exaggerating what happened that night. At the time, I was 18, living with my parents and my younger brother in a 2-story house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't some ancient, haunted-looking place you see in horror movies. No rotting shutters, no creaky gates, no Gothic towers. It was a fairly average suburban home, built sometime in the late 70s, with beige siding, an attached garage, and a basement that my dad insisted on using as storage. We weren't a particularly wealthy family, but we were comfortable. My dad worked long shifts as an electrician, and my mom was a school nurse. My younger brother, Danny, was only 13 at the time, quiet, obsessed with video games, always glued to his headphones. As for me, I was just trying to get through my last year of high school. My routine was ordinary, almost boring. Wake up early, go to school, come back, waste time on the computer, eat dinner, shower, sleep. If anything, I prided myself on how normal things were. There's a strange comfort in predictability, knowing what to expect, what comes next. The house itself had its own rhythm, too. The faint humming of the furnace in the winter, the way the floorboards groaned near the kitchen doorway, the constant dripping sound in the upstairs bathroom sink that my dad kept promising he'd fix. I knew these sounds so well they almost became background music to my life. But there was one part of the house I always avoided, the basement. It wasn't finished, not really. The concrete floor was stained from years of leaks and old paint spills, and the single naked bulb that hung from the ceiling barely lit half the space. Boxes stacked everywhere, shelves filled with old holiday decorations, photo albums, tools, broken appliances. A graveyard of forgotten things. Whenever I had to go down there, I always felt like the shadows were thicker than they should be, like they clung to the corners, watching me. It sounds silly, but I used to sprint back up the stairs, 2 at a time, and slam the door shut as if that could keep whatever was down there from following me. That Thursday night had started like any other. Dinner at 7 o'clock. Danny retreating to his room by 8 o'clock. Mom and Dad leaving around 9:30 to visit my aunt who lived a couple towns over. They told me they might not be back until the next morning. I pretended not to care, but the truth is, I hated being left alone in that house at night. The weather wasn't helping either. It was one of those bone-deep cold nights where the air feels sharp in your lungs. The wind rattled the windows, making the old tree branches scratch against the siding like fingernails. Still, I tried to distract myself. I made a bowl of popcorn, sat in the living room with the TV on low, and scrolled through my phone. Hours passed quietly enough. Midnight, 1 a.m., then, eventually, 2. I wasn't tired, though. Something about the silence in the house felt heavier than usual, pressing against me, refusing to let me sleep. That's when I noticed something small, a detail I brushed off at the time. The basement door. It was slightly open, just an inch, maybe two, but enough that I could see a sliver of the darkness behind it. I knew I had closed it earlier that evening. I always did, almost out of habit. I remember staring at that gap, my skin prickling with unease. Maybe Danny had gone down there for something, but his door was closed upstairs, and I could hear the faint sound of gunfire and shouting from his video game leaking through his headphones. So why was the basement door open? I stood up, walked over, and shut it firmly until I heard the latch click. Then I went back to the couch, telling myself it was nothing. Just the draft from the windows. Just the wind. Just the old house shifting. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasiness in my chest. That creeping feeling that I wasn't really alone. And that was before the knocking started. The first knock came so softly, I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard it. I was sitting in the living room, phone in hand, half watching some late-night rerun on TV. The house was dark except for the glow of the screen and the faint yellow light from the kitchen. Everything else was swallowed by shadows. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. It didn't sound like the usual creaks and groans of the house. It was deliberate, spaced evenly apart, and it came from beneath me, the basement. At first, I laughed nervously to myself. Maybe it was Danny. Maybe he had gone down to grab an old game console or something from storage. I turned my head toward the stairs and called out, "Danny?" No answer. The faint sound of his video game still drifted down from upstairs, muffled voices shouting, explosions, the click-clack of rapid gunfire. He was in his room, which meant he couldn't have been in the basement. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "It's just the pipes," I muttered under my breath. "The coal's making the metal shift." But pipes don't knock 3 times. I tried to distract myself. I turned the TV volume up a little, scrolled through my phone, and avoided looking at the basement door at the end of the hall. Yet, no matter what I did, my eyes kept drifting back to it. That plain white door, with its peeling paint and that strip of blackness underneath, seemed to hum with attention, like it was aware I was watching it. And then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time louder, sharper, like knuckles rapping against wood. I jumped, nearly spilling the bowl of popcorn from my lap. My heart raced so fast it hurt, and my ears buzzed with the pounding of blood. I wanted to scream for Danny, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and inch toward the door. Every step across the hall felt like it took forever. The floorboards creaked under my weight, echoing far too loud in the silence. By the time I reached the basement door, I was holding my breath without realizing it. I placed my hand on the knob. It felt cold, almost unnaturally so. My fingers hovered there for a moment before I pulled them back, shaking my head. No, I wasn't going down there. Not at this hour. Not alone. Instead, I pressed my ear against the door, straining to listen. For a long, tense moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, as if right on cue, knock, knock, knock. So close this time that the vibrations rattled against the wood beneath my ear. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. My instinct screamed at me to run, to lock myself in my room and wait until morning. But another part of me, the stubborn, logical part, refused to believe it. There had to be an explanation. Maybe some animal had gotten in through a broken vent. Maybe the wind was shifting debris against the foundation. Maybe I was just overtired, imagining things. I backed away slowly, refusing to take my eyes off the door. Finally, I sank back onto the couch, curling my knees up to my chest like a little kid. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Even Danny's video game upstairs had gone silent. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:57 a.m. The exact same time I'd heard the knocks the first time. That detail lodged itself in my brain like a thorn. Too precise to ignore. Too perfect to be random. I sat there for what felt like an eternity. It was straining. Every nerve in my body pulled taut. But the knocking didn't return. Eventually, my exhaustion caught up with me. Against my better judgment, I convinced myself it was nothing and dragged myself upstairs to bed. I shut my door tight, locked it, something I never usually did, and slid beneath the covers, fully clothed. For a few minutes, I almost managed to calm down. My breathing slowed, and the warmth of the blankets cocooned me in fragile comfort. My eyelids grew heavy. And then, knock, knock, knock. This time, it didn't come from the basement. It came from my bedroom door. The sound of those knocks on my bedroom door froze me solid. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, patient strikes, the same rhythm, the same cadence as before. Only this time, it wasn't muffled beneath my feet in the basement. It was right there, only a few feet away, separated from me by nothing but a thin piece of wood. I held my breath, heart pounding so violently I thought the sound alone might give me away. I wanted to scream for Danny, but some instinct deep in my chest stopped me. Something about those knocks felt wrong. Not just frightening, wrong. Like calling attention to myself would be the worst possible thing I could do. I sat up slowly in bed, staring at the doorknob. The room was nearly pitch black except for the faint glow of my alarm clock, 3:01 a.m. I could see the round shape of the knob glinting faintly, perfectly still, perfectly ordinary. But the silence pressed against me like a weight. I told myself it had to be Danny playing some kind of prank. Maybe he'd snuck out of his room. Maybe he'd heard me freak out downstairs and decided to mess with me. That explanation made sense. It was almost comforting. Except, when I forced myself to listen, I realized something. Danny's headphones were still on. I could hear the faint chatter of his online friends through the wall, the sound of gunfire and laughter. He was in his room, which meant whoever, or whatever, was knocking on my door wasn't him. The air in my room felt suddenly heavy, suffocating, and I realized I was gripping the blanket so tightly my knuckles ached. For a long time, nothing happened. The knocks didn't repeat. The doorknob didn't turn. The silence stretched on and on until my body trembled with the effort of staying still. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I whispered, "Danny?" The sound of my own voice felt dangerous in that silence. Reckless. I waited. Nothing. Then, from the other side of the door, came the faintest sound. Not a knock this time, but something softer, like fingertips brushing down the wood. A slow, deliberate caress. I clamped a hand over my mouth, eyes wide. I don't remember falling asleep after that. I only remember waking up to sunlight streaming through my curtains, my body stiff and my throat raw from holding back screams all night. For a brief, fragile moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare, some sleep paralysis hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But when I dragged myself out of bed and looked at my door, my stomach turned to ice. There were marks on it, 3 faint, vertical streaks running down the center, not scratches exactly, but smears, as if someone had dragged dirty fingers down the wood. I scrubbed at them, convincing myself it was just my imagination, just shadows from the hallway. But the more I rubbed, the clearer they became. I didn't say anything to Danny. I didn't want him to laugh at me. Instead, I went through my day in a fog, barely paying attention at school, every sound making me flinch. A slammed locker, a door shutting too quickly, even the tapping of a pencil, all of it made me jump. By the time I got home, I'd almost managed to convince myself it was just stress. My parents were still gone, so I tried to keep things normal. Dinner, homework, scrolling through my phone. But as night fell, the house grew heavy again. Too quiet, too still. At 2:57 a.m. on the dot, it started again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I didn't move. I stayed frozen in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The knocks came from the basement again, echoing faintly through the floor. I clenched my fists, whispering to myself that it was just the pipes, just the house, just the wind. But then the knocks grew louder, and louder, until they weren't muffled anymore. They were sharp, resonant, like someone was knocking on the underside of my floor, directly beneath my bed. I leapt out of bed, heart hammering, and stumbled into the hallway. Danny's door was open, and he was standing there, pale and wide-eyed. "You heard it too," he whispered. I nodded, too shaken to speak. For a long time, we just stood there, staring at the basement door at the end of the hall. The knocking had stopped the moment we left our rooms, but the silence felt even worse. Danny finally broke it. "We should check." I wanted to tell him no, to beg him to go back to his room and pretend none of this was happening. But some part of me needed answers. needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. So together, we crept toward the basement door. The air grew colder with each step, and I swear the shadows around the frame seemed to pulse, like they were breathing. Danny reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the knob. "It's freezing," he whispered. He looked at me, his eyes wide, silently asking if we should open it. I shook my head quickly. But before either of us could move away, the knob began to turn. On its own, slowly, deliberately. We both stumbled back, frozen in terror, as the latch clicked. The basement door creaked open with a slow groan, the hinges whining like something alive. Danny and I stood rooted to the hallway floor, staring as the gap widened inch by inch. The air that drifted out was colder than anything I'd ever felt inside a house, damp, sharp, and metallic, like the smell of wet earth mixed with rust. The single hallway light above us flickered, dimmed, then steadied again, throwing long shadows against the walls. "Close it," I whispered. My voice cracked, more plea than command. But Danny couldn't move. His hand hovered near mine, trembling violently, his eyes locked in the darkness yawning open at the bottom of the stairs. For a moment, there was nothing, just the stale breath of the basement washing over us. And then, knock, knock, knock. This time it didn't come from below. It came from the inside of the door itself. We both screamed and stumbled backward as the door shuttered violently under 3 heavy strikes, the sound reverberating through the entire hallway. I swear I felt the floor shake. Danny bolted first, sprinting into his room and slamming the door. I should have followed, but something in me, curiosity, defiance, or sheer stupidity, kept me frozen in place. The knob twisted again. The door swung open wider. And then, from the black void of the basement, something stepped onto the first stair. I couldn't see it clearly. Not really. Just a faint impression of movement in the dark. A shape that didn't seem to fit right with the shadows, like the darkness itself had peeled off and taken form. The sound it made wasn't footsteps exactly. More like the dragging scrape of something heavy shifting its weight. Too slow, too deliberate to be human. Every hair on my body stood on end. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My chest felt locked in a vice. Then, a whisper, low, hissing, almost playful. "Let me in." The words slithered through the dark, not loud but impossibly clear, like they were spoken directly into my skull. That snapped me out of it. I turned and ran, heart slamming against my ribs, feet thundering up the stairs to my room. I slammed my door, locked it, shoved my desk against it with trembling arms. My phone. I needed my phone. I grabbed it from the nightstand, nearly dropping it in my sweaty hands, and dialed 911. The operator answered, calm and detached. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house. I stammered, my words tripping over each other. They're in the basement. They're trying to... Knock, 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 on my bedroom door. I choked on the words, pressing my back against the desk as if my weight could keep the thing out. The knocks came again, louder this time, rattling the wood. "Stay on the line," the operator said, her voice steady. "Help is on the way. Stay where you are." But the thing outside my door wasn't waiting. The handle rattled violently, jerking back and forth with inhuman speed, like someone was testing the lock with frantic, eager strength. Danny screamed from the other room, a high, panic wail that cut through me like a knife. "Danny!" I shouted, but my voice broke, useless against the chaos. The lights flickered again, once, twice, then blew out entirely. The room plunged into suffocating black. And in that darkness, something pressed against the crack of my door. Not a hand, not anything human. A shadow, thick and oily, oozed through the gap like smoke, curling upward in tendrils that reached across my floor. Cold washed over me as the darkness spread, the air heavy with a scent of damp soil and rot. I dropped the phone. I didn't even hear it hit the floor. The buzzing in my ears drowned out everything. My body moved on instinct alone. The window. I stumbled toward it, ripping the curtains aside with shaking hands. My fingers fumbled with the latch before wrenching it open. Freezing air blasted my face as I climbed onto the sill, half blind with terror. Behind me, the shadow hissed, stretching further into the room, reaching for me like a living thing. "Don't leave," it whispered. I didn't think. I jumped. The fall knocked the breath out of me, pain shooting through my legs as I hit the frozen ground outside. My ankle twisted, sending fire up my calf, but adrenaline shoved me forward. I scrambled to my feet and bolted across the lawn. The street was empty, silent, bathed in the harsh white glow of a single flickering street lamp. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the crunch of snow underfoot, and knock, knock, knock. I whipped around. The sound echoed from inside the house, from Danny's window. Free, slow, patient knocks against the glass. His light flicked on. I saw his silhouette in the window, small, terrified. He pressed his hands to the glass, mouth moving, but I couldn't hear his words. Behind him, something moved, a taller shape, formless and black, rising up from the floor, looming over him like smoke given life. "Danny!" I screamed, limping toward the front door. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the handle to tame, but I forced it open, stumbling back inside. The air was suffocating, heavy with that metallic stench. The house groaned, every bar creaking under invisible weight. I rushed up the stairs, shouting his name. Halfway up, the temperature plummeted, my breath fogging in the air. And then I heard it, the sound that made my blood freeze. The whisper, but this time it wasn't speaking to me. It was speaking to him. "Let me in." I burst into his room just as Danny screamed. The window shattered inward, glass spraying across the floor, and the shadows surged forward, engulfing the room in blackness. For a split second, I saw Danny's terrified face, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent plea, and then the dark swallowed him. "No!" I lunged forward, grabbing his arm, pulling with everything I had. The shadow resisted, tugging him back with inhuman strength, its tendrils wrapping around his body. "Danny, hold on." I screamed, my voice raw, desperate. For one unbearable moment, it felt like he was slipping away, like the darkness was stronger, hungrier. But then, somewhere far away, I heard sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the broken window, scattering across the walls. The shadow recoiled with a hiss, retreating just enough for me to yank Danny free. We collapsed onto the floor together, gasping, trembling, sobbing. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house. Flashlights cut through the dark. "Police!" a voice shouted. By the time they reached us, the shadow was gone. But the smell lingered, that thick, metallic stench. And those three faint words still echoed in my skull. "Let me in." The police swarmed the house that night. Flashlights slicing through every room, radio crackling, boots stomping across the floorboards. They searched the basement, the attic, every closet, every crawl space. But they found nothing. No intruder. No signs of forced entry. Nothing but shattered glass in Danny's room, a few smears on my bedroom door, and two kids too shaken to explain what had really happened. When my parents came home the next morning, they were furious and terrified all at once. Furious that we'd imagined something so extreme would call the police, terrified of the broken window, the mess, the look on our faces. Danny barely spoke for days. He sat on his bed with his knees pulled up to his chest, headphones clamped over his ears but no music playing. Just silence. His eyes darted constantly, like he was listening for something no one else could hear. As for me, I couldn't sleep. Not really. I'd drift off for an hour at most before jerking awake, convinced I heard knocking. Every sound in that house turned against me. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, the rattle of tree branches against the siding. They all became threats. Each one made my chest tighten, my skin crawl. I couldn't be alone in a room with the door closed. Couldn't stand silence. I kept the TV or the radio on at all times, even when I wasn't paying attention. Anything to drown out that rhythm burned into my skull. Knock, knock, knock. We tried to act normal, but the house wouldn't let us. At night, the air still grew cold, heavy, metallic. Sometimes Danny swore he heard whispers coming from the basement vent. Sometimes I catch movement in the corner of my eye, not shapes exactly, but shifts in shadow, darker patches of black against the dark. We told my parents we couldn't stay there anymore. My dad resisted at first. "It's our home. There's nothing wrong with it." But even he couldn't deny the way the basement door walked tighter in its frame, as if something pushed against it from the inside. Within a month, we moved. Different house, different neighborhood. We didn't even take half the stuff from the basement. My parents left boxes behind like offerings to whatever had claimed that place. But leaving didn't mean it ended. If anything, it followed us. The first night in the new house, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, straining to hear every sound. The furnace kicking on, the pipes settling, the wind outside, all harmless, all explainable. And then, faint, almost gentle, came the sound. Knock, knock, knock. Not from the basement this time, from the wall right behind my bed. I sat up so fast I nearly choked on my own breath, heart galloping in my chest. My hand hovered over my phone, ready to dial 911 again. But the knocks didn't repeat. Just 3, slow and patient. Enough to remind me. Enough to let me know it hadn't forgotten. The weeks after that turned into a blur of paranoia. I couldn't focus in school. Couldn't hold conversations without my mind drifting to the possibility that it might happen again. I jumped at every sudden noise, every flicker of light. Danny wasn't doing better. If anything, he was worse. He refused to sleep in his own room, dragging a blanket to the living room couch every night. His grades slipped. He stopped playing video games altogether. Sometimes I catch him staring at the walls, lips moving as if he was listening to someone I couldn't hear. Therapists didn't help. Neither did priests or house blessings, or my mom's desperate insistence that we needed a fresh start. Because you can't start fresh when something is still following you. I started noticing patterns. The knocks always came at the same time, 2:57 a.m. sharp. Always 3 of them, no more, no less. Always followed by silence, like it was waiting, testing me. And the smell, that metallic tang of wet earth and rust. Sometimes faint, sometimes choking, but always there, in the corners of rooms, in the cracks of doors, lingering on my clothes. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was trauma, paranoia, an echo burned into my brain by one terrifying night. But then Danny started drawing. 3 vertical lines, over and over, on his notebooks, on scraps of paper, on the back of his homework. Just 3 smears down the page, like the streaks on my bedroom door. When I asked him why, he only shrugged, eyes distant. It's what it leaves behind. I didn't ask again. My parents pretended not to notice. Pretended we were adjusting. But the truth is, that night in the old house had cracked something in us. A fracture that couldn't be patched over by denial or relocation. We locked our doors religiously. Added cameras, alarms, motion sensors. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. Locks only keep people out. And this thing, it didn't need doors. Some nights, when I lie awake with every muscle in my body tight as wire, I swear I can still hear it whispering. Low, patient, almost playful. Let me in. And though I never answer, though I never dare to move a muscle, I'm terrified that one night, Danny will. I think about that night more often than I should. Not because I want to, but because it never really left me. It follows me into every quiet space, every sleepless hour, every time the house creaks when it shouldn't. And if you've ever experienced something you can't explain, something that sinks its claws into your life and refuses to let go, you know exactly what I mean. The truth is, we tell ourselves lies to survive. We say, it was just a wind. We say, it was just a dream. We say, it was nothing. But deep down, we know better. Some things don't care if you believe in them or not. Some things will knock anyway. That's the part one keeps circling back to. The knocking. It wasn't random. It wasn't frantic or desperate like a burglar or some prank. It was calm, patient, precise, like it knew exactly what it was doing and exactly how long it could wait. Because that's a real horror. Monsters don't always break in. Sometimes they just wait for you to open the door. I used to think the scariest thing in the world was being alone in a dark house. Now I know it's realizing you're not alone, and that whatever's with you doesn't need to rush. It taught me something I hate admitting out loud. Evil doesn't always come crashing through the window. Sometimes it seeps in, quiet, polite, almost playful. And when it does, you're never quite the same afterward. Even now, when I hear knocking, delivery drivers, neighbors, even just someone at the door, my stomach twists. I freeze, every nerve in my body brace for that rhythm. 3 deliberate strikes. The sound that marked the night my life split into a before and after. And here's the thing, if you ever hear it, you'll know. You won't mistake it for pipes or wind or anything ordinary. It has a weight to it, a patience, a hunger. I can't tell you how to stop it. God, I wish I could. But if I've learned anything, it's this: don't answer. Don't go looking. Don't convince yourself curiosity is harmless. Because once you open that door, even a crack, it doesn't close again. That's the lesson I carry, the scar I wear every day. Curiosity doesn't just kill cats. It feeds the things waiting in the dark. People laugh when I tell them I don't stay up past 2:30 anymore. They think it's superstition, paranoia, maybe even a little funny. But that's fine. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel the floor vibrate beneath their feet. They didn't smell the rust, the earth, the decay. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Nobody else ever really understands. Not fully. Trauma is a private prison. And some of us are locked in tighter than others. But if you take anything from what I've told you tonight, let it be this. When you hear knocking where there shouldn't be any, basement doors, closet doors, walls that should be solid, don't wait. Don't listen. Don't let it in. Because once you acknowledge it, once you give it that sliver of attention, it knows. And it always comes back. I've made peace with the fact that mine isn't finished with me. That one night, whether it's months or years from now, I'll wake at 2:57 a.m. to those 3 slow knocks again. Maybe next time it won't wait so patiently. Maybe next time Danny won't resist the urge to answer. And maybe next time, I won't have the strength to stay silent. But until then, I'll keep the lights on. I'll stay away from the basement. And I'll pray that when you hear a knock in the dark, you remember my story and you don't make the same mistake I did. Because some doors, once opened, never close. It's been months since that night, and life has carried on in the strange way it always does after something unspeakable happens. People expect you to heal, to move forward, to treat it as just a story. But some stories don't end. Last week, I was sitting at my desk, trying to convince myself to focus on work. It was mid-afternoon, sunlight pouring in, birds chirping outside. Safe, normal, and then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. 3 dots. Just 3. Perfectly spaced. Perfectly familiar. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, refusing to believe what I was seeing. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I deleted the message. Told myself it was a glitch. A spam bot. Something explainable. That night, I locked every door. Checked every window. Double bolted the basement, as I always do. I left the TV on, volume low, just a background noise. And at 2:57 a.m., when the house was at its quietest, knock, knock, knock. Not from the basement this time. Not from the bedroom door. From the window. On the 2nd floor. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened as the glass trembled under the sound, as if someone, or something, was waiting patiently on the other side. And in that silence, I realized a part I've never told anyone before. The knocking never really left. It just followed me here. And maybe it's listening now.